My name is Rocky Babson, and I will tell you that I have a master's degree in failure. You're looking at probably the only GRT to have been thrown out of the tough page, roughly 2013 or so. I've been a thorn in Jason and Emily's side since I first started GORUCK in 2011 or 2012. In 2013 and 2014, a series of life things happened for me. And it was the stacking of several failures that brought me to a culmination of you're either going to get your shit together and make life happen, or you're just going to continue down this continued path. And so I met someone who was the department chair for Emory's psychiatry department, and she basically called me out on my bullshit. And she said, it's really time for you to stop playing in this world of self-defeating behavior and start creating in that space. So in that context, this thing happened. The same thing with Michael. I got very present to the love that Rocky has for Rocky. What in the hell does that have to do with Ukraine? A day after my birthday last year, February 20th, the Russians invaded Ukraine, and I started, so by way of background, I am a nobody. When Emily asked me to come up here and speak on this stage, I thought, man, there is no way. I am not qualified. There is a progeny of people that, when you see their faces and their pictures, I'm just not in that category. But she was adamant, and so here I am. And so a day after my birthday last year, when the Russians invaded Ukraine, my Signal and text messages and just everything started coming alive with people, chatting about what was happening. Some of them, a few of them had been in Ukraine for the year prior and were advising the government on a lot of different things. And so being the person that's generally, I was the guy that would put two people that had a skill set in the same room, operating in the quiet background with them coming together to do great things in the world. And so what happened is these folks started talking to me about needs and requirements and what they needed. So February 20th, when all of this started, I made a decision that I was going to do something to try to have some kind of impact on what was happening over there. A year later, our ability to get things into Ukraine has changed incredibly. But in the first few weeks of this war, there was an incredible need for the most basic of things. IFAKs, tourniquets, packing for wounds, anti-bleed, IV starter kits, all of that. So what I did was I reached out to people that I knew. I reached out to people that I didn't know. And I started putting people into rooms who could help me get what I needed for the people who were messaging me and desperately needed help. So over the next couple of weeks, I had folks at North American Rescue, orthopedic surgeons in the Southeast, even the girl that does my Botox donated an incredible amount of stuff. And so what we did was we were able to get all of this medical together, and I told my husband, I'm going. And he said, be safe. He knew there was nothing that was going to get in my way of that, so he just supported me. So my very first trip, I had 9 checked bags. I had lived in Europe for about 6 years working in Prague. I knew my way around the area. And I also knew that when I landed, I didn't have a plan as to how I was going to get from Poland into Ukraine. I had an idea because I had people on the other side who were advising and counseling, but I had never done a non-traditional or traditional border crossing into a place where an active war was taking place. So I landed in Prague. You want to talk about a ruck? I had 9 checked bags. I met up with some people in Prague in a vehicle, and off we went. We had a meeting in Warsaw at the U.S. Embassy to get just a brief outline of what to expect when we got over there, and then we made the drive. This is crossing at Krakowec from the Polish side into the Ukrainian side, and patch soup. Oh boy, this is good. If there's one thing that I've learned from GORUCK, it's that people will do anything for a 2x3 piece of cloth. I will never forget Bo, bless his heart, he did this fantastic video in his kitchen years ago, probably 8 or 9 years ago. Somebody on the Tough page had lost their patch in some calamity, and they were on the Tough page, and they lost their patch, and they wanted to know if HQ would send them a new one. And Bo did this very smart-ass video, which is basically, it's a 2x3 piece of cloth, and it's empty and meaningless. What is meaningful and not empty is what it took for you to get there. So I reached out to a lot of people and said, hey, I'm going over, send me a bunch of American flag patches. And of all the things that I brought in, other than the medical, this was the smart thing. Because after I crossed into Ukraine, there are intermediate checkpoints between Lviv and Kyiv. And every opportunity I had, I fisted one of these American patches into their hands. And I'm going to tell you, after 24, 25 crossings back and forth, I became kind of like my face was known. And so it helped tremendously. If there is a school for border crossing, yours truly would have gotten an A. I knew everybody at both the Polish side and the Ukrainian side. The counter intel guy on the Ukrainian side looked forward to me coming over because he knew I brought American bourbon and cigarettes. And he would always come out of his little hut and he would say in his broken English, "So glad to have you back." This is a little piece of paper. Basically, when you come across from Polish side over to the Ukrainian side, they give you this piece of paper, and it's kind of like a stamp along the way. And that basically, with those 3 stamps and a signature, it's your exit out of the final. My very first trip, the Russians were still in Bucha, Irpin, Bordyanka, the western perimeter side of Kyiv. So we didn't make it that far in. But I made it, this picture epitomizes like what the first impact of all of this was. And it got me very present to being able to get out of the viewing stands and onto the playing field, which is exactly what everyone here in this room is doing during this weekend. If you've participated in any kind of GORUCK event or anything that Jason and Emily have done this weekend, this really got me present to the impact this 700 pounds that I brought over in my very first trip would make. I cut it out for the purposes of this presentation, but over here on the side was this elderly gentleman with a broom amongst all of this destruction, and he was literally just sweeping a pad of concrete to make some kind of difference. This is one of the roads coming on the outskirts of Kyiv. This is where I stayed in Kyiv. That sunset was a day that I won't forget, because a few hours later, we were getting ready to do some work on the eastern side of Kyiv when a missile struck. And that's about as close as I got to any kind of real danger. Whatever your political ideology, whatever your belief systems are with what is going on, I will tell you that the death and destruction that I saw there firsthand is atrocious. I never spent any time in Iraq or Afghanistan. All of my time as a Pogue Air Force guy was in Kuwait. I would hear stories about what was happening on the other sides. It seemed like this was just a very intentional anti-civilian movement by the folks that were coming into this otherwise independent country. That's a tank turret, and juxtaposed amongst all of this destruction, we would always see and always find something beautiful, including this guy.
Дякуємо всім. Це наш наш американський друг Рокі. Він приїхав з Америки. Это надо было. Я здесь.
It's okay.
Да, окей.
Okay?
Да.
Slava Ukraine.
Нет.
Ukrainian was terrible.
Как же слава.
So Nikolai lived in Bucha, and he and his wife endured through that 8 week of occupation without any kind of medicine. You want to talk about impact? Impact. That guy had not been able to get anything that he and his wife needed medication-wise, and he could not believe that a group of Ukrainians and an American would come in literally 2 weeks after the Russians got their freaking asses kicked out of Bucha and Irpin to bring them medicine. Out of the viewing stands and onto the playing field. It was forever, that moment will forever live with me. Do you know anybody who would do anything to save their dog or cat? I know somebody who would do anything to save their dog. This man in the middle, the Russians were coming through these areas, and if they could not get people to speak, they would do atrocious things to their children. And if they did not have children, they did atrocious things to their animals. Before we got started here, I got parents' permission. I've got a slide on here that's coming up. I will not go into any detail since we've got kids in the room. But think about the worst thing that a human being can do, and they did it. And so, Andre here took a stand for his dog. And when the Russians were trying to grab a hold of this dog and do really terrible things to it, he said no. And I acknowledge him for taking a stand the way that he did, because he certainly could have died. Out of the viewing stands and onto the playing field. So here's the apex of this war for me. This is my third trip inside of Bucha and Irpin again, when they really started looking and finding these mass graves. I watched as a 21-year-old man, boy, youth, was going through 22 body bags looking for his parents. And it was, I needed to capture the moment to tell his story. The impact of getting out of the viewing stands and onto the playing field. Tina sure could have used you. I'm not kidding. It took me about 30 minutes to grab this boy's attention. During the occupation, the people in the village had hidden this boy between 4 or 5 different homes and basements. They would move him at night under cover of darkness. And this is one of the smaller flags that I had, but it took me about 30 minutes to build trust with him. He was afraid of any man. He would only go to his grandmother or to other women. But I finally earned his trust and patched him. The most lasting part of all of this experience is the relationships that I've built, the trust that I've made with some of the folks that I've worked with over there, including this Azov battalion commander who presented me with a knife made of Azov steel. And about 12 years ago, Jason did one of the first Vimeo videos, and I see that I'm out of time, so I'm going to leave it on this. And I actually, because I want to get Jason's words right, I actually wrote it down. It's one of the first videos that speaks about GORUCK. What I did not foresee was the impact that it would have on people. Ultimately, people became the focus, and people would build GORUCK. Impact, it's just that simple. You can't experience that enough in life. Being a team, being with people, that's the drug. That's why people come. Thank you for letting me tell you a little bit about my story in Ukraine. And I encourage all of you in some small part. It does not have to be 6,000 miles away. You can get out of the viewing stands and onto the playing field as soon as you walk out that door. Thank you very much.